Please note, the opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Tri-County Orthopedics. Any medical advice or treatment recommendations discussed should always be reviewed with your own healthcare provider. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All right, welcome back to the OrthoZone. I'm Dr. Stephen Hunt, one of the orthopedic sports medicine specialists at Tri-County Orthopedics, and it's my great pleasure to have my partner, Dr. Andrew Willis, another orthopedic sports medicine specialist at Tri-County, join us today. So welcome, Dr. Willis.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt.
I am really excited for this episode. It's actually going to be several episodes where we're going to dive deep into sort of what it's like as a head team orthopedic surgeon for an NFL team. And since this is your first time on the OrthoZone podcast, we'd like to start off by sort of introducing you to the audience, learning a little bit more about what got you into orthopedic surgery, where did you train, and how did you end up here in New Jersey?
All right, all good questions. So first, I grew up in Massachusetts, and my medical or educational journey brought me through New York City, where I did my medical education at Columbia, and then went just down to the east side to do my residency at the Hospital of Special Surgery, Cornell, for internship and my residency in orthopedics, as well as my sports fellowship, and then out to Minnesota for a second fellowship in hand and elbow surgery.
You wanted to keep training your whole life, or?
They always say stay in school as long as you can, so you don't have to start your real job.
Yeah, that's a lot of training. I forgot to mention you are double board certified in both sports and hand orthopedic surgery. And so how'd you end up back here in New Jersey?
Well, first, to get back to your question about the field itself and in medicine and orthopedic surgery, my undergraduate education was at Dartmouth, your rival.
Sort of
or our rival. Not
maybe
really.
Your rival.
Yeah. But at the time, I played football and lacrosse there, and so that was a big part of my life experience, sports and the athlete and the atmosphere of the athlete and the world of the athlete in terms of how it shaped, mold your character, your development, and sort of helped to provide confidence, independence, perseverance, etc. And so the desire sort of through those experiences was to continue to maintain a connection with all that. And since continuing an athletic career as a professional was not an option, it
like
was
myself. I'm
like
with you on
of
that
course.
one. Yeah.
I did not have that opportunity, but wanted to stay involved and felt that it was too important a part of my life to sort of not find a way to wind into my profession and interest in science and biology, biochemistry, especially biochemistry, really brought me closer to wanting to pursue a career in medicine and particularly orthopedic surgery. And I felt it was a good way to mix everything together and to have a career that was sort of what I call a hobby as a job, which equals your profession. And so that's how I sort of went the route of medicine. As far as getting to New Jersey, after training, I was fortunate enough to train with my mentor, who was the head team physician for the Giants, and my other mentor for the New York Mets. And their mentorship really shaped me and my interest and desire to follow in their lead if the opportunity presented, and wanted to stay in the area. And they were close friends with our senior partner, Dr. Mark McBride, who, as you know, is the mayor, and I think knows every single person.
Pretty much everyone listening to this podcast right now.
And the greatest guy. And so he founded this practice, and that connection with some of his close friends who were my mentors and attendings at Hospital of Special Surgery sort of serendipitously connected us. And frankly, what I've learned is it was a great practice, and there's people like our partner Paul Lombardi, who I knew in training, who was doing his fellowship in arthroplasty when I was there as a junior. And all of a sudden I realized there's high quality, good people, and this was a great practice. And I think when my wife came out to meet with him and myself, with Mark, and he had his Newfie there, dog, I think it was all over. And my wife's like, all right, we got to come here.
Gotcha. Yes. I got to mention you have about 700 pounds of dog at home.
650.
Okay. Who's counting at this point? No, it's actually funny you bring that up, because when I was a chief resident at NYU and I was sitting in Bellevue on call, my wife, who was from this area, had always talked about Tri-County Orthopedics, and there was an ad in the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery, and I called it up. I was like, oh my God, they're looking for a partner. And it happened to be a year-old ad, and I got Mark on the phone, and I'm going to do a horrible Mark McBride impression. impression, but he's like, you sound great, but we just hired a guy, Andrew Willis. He's a great guy. He's doing the same stuff. So I don't think we got a spot for you. So lo and behold, it worked out for both of us. You were here before me. I joined Tri-County in 2012. And moving on to sort of the topic we wanted to get into here is, people recognize your hair and your face on one of the most significant moments in New York Jets history. And that was a Monday night game 2 seasons ago when our quarterback unfortunately went down 4 plays into the game. We were all devastated, and people see you on the field walking off with Aaron Rodgers. And I thought it would be a great idea when people sort of see, all right, we see he's an orthopedic surgeon. They're taking care of the players. That makes sense. But they may not know sort of what is the full role of you as the head orthopedic surgeon for the New York Jets. What is the daily life like? And we're going to try to break this podcast down into 3 episodes. We're going to talk about sort of preseason and training camp. We're going to talk about what it's like in season, what's the day-to-day, and then we'll talk about the off-season, because I think a lot of people think that once the end of the season occurs, and we're hopefully in the playoffs this year, and maybe we'll go far, but once the Super Bowl ends, that people kind of shut football down for a while. And I think they'll be interested to know that there's actually a lot that happens in the off-season, a lot of time that is required of you as the head team orthopedist.
Well, it's so true. And so I hear all the time, like, you must be so glad the season's almost over. You get a break, things wind down, and it's nice and calm and easy, which is totally not true. And I think that people don't really understand that this is a year-round, full-time job, and you're kind of holding 2 jobs, manage them simultaneously. There's some overlap, which makes it easy, but office and your practice as well as what happens outside the practice. And so this is a multi-billion-dollar business, the NFL, and it doesn't stop, and there's always a next step. And so when one thing ends, the madness and craziness of the next thing starts. And so the process can be broken down, like you said, into various phases, and you can sort of tackle each one, but there's a lot that goes on, and it's somewhat different, but still along a continuum of a process, which is building and creating a healthy team that can compete and win.
Right. And that's definitely our goal, but don't hold us to we're just trying to keep the guys healthy, right? We're not necessarily calling plays or anything like that. So that being said, so let's dive in. I have a little bit of insight being, one of your partners in this with Dr. Montgomery. And so I want to sort of tackle this by saying, let's start with preseason. So 10 days ago, we start off with what?
So this is interesting. I always say we start off with what happened in the months prior, which means that you got to pick an arbitrary start point, and there's a lot that goes into making that start point successful. But essentially, just for the sake of breaking it down, we start with preseason physicals, which means report time, and all the players have to report for training camp. Prior to training camp, they need to check in, and just like every team, you need to make sure they're healthy, they're ready to play, and it's safe for them to do so. And so you go through a process that involves a lot of different specialties and people, highly coordinated, pretty involved, but essentially evaluate each player and make sure that they're healthy enough to participate safely. And so that's the first step. And because there's such a large number and the roster changes, training camp, usually there are about 90 bodies that are there, players, and that allows for enough people to practice against each other and to hone skills and to get ready for the season. So you need an expanded roster. So there's about 90 people that will start on the team. And so we have to do the physicals, clear them, get them ready to go. And we break that down into like day 1 of physicals with the rookies and injured people coming back to make sure that they have passed all the requirements to play, and they take a little more time. So that's the first round. Then you have healthy vets, and they come in later. And you spend quite a bit of time going through and doing documentation. There's a lot of administrative work to keep track of everyone. And so once that occurs, they can then step on the field and start to participate in football activities.
And so that's when most people think like, hey, look, preseason camp started, they're practicing. But before they even get on the field, they have to be cleared to do that, both by us and also the medical staff.
Right.
make sure there's no medical issues. And so once we get that going, like they basically start their first practice and there's kind of a ramp up in terms of intensity. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of guys fighting for roster spots, right? There's some guys who are under contract we know are going to make the team, but there's a lot of intensity at these practices. And so what are the sort of days like during preseason when they are practicing?
Well, because there is the acclimation period where they make sure it's safe in terms of their physical aerobic capacity. They acclimate to the heat, the pads, and contact is progressively introduced. And that has a lot to do with the safety of contact, safety of the heat and the weather. And so there's a process there. And each day, because there's a lot of people, and as it ramps up and gets more physical, because it is a violent sport, and there's a lot to manage, we do need people there. And so it's sort of an army of medical staff that is organized, and part of the preseason process is organizing and covering camp in terms of monitoring for injury, being available for emergency, and having things set up to deal with them. And so for each practice, we do have someone there, whether it's our fellows, staff attendings, medical present, we have paramedics, there is IV nurses, there's a cooling trailer, there's IVs available for heat issues, cooling baths. There's a ton of administrative and field groundwork that needs to be done in preparation to make sure every event has enough coverage and safety outlets to take care of anything that could happen.
Right. And so some of those things may not present immediately on the field while we're watching the practice. Some of these things end up in the training room a little bit later. So that's why we're usually there to assess some of these injuries, or sometimes they're coming over to your office here in Cedar Knolls, right? And you're assessing them later if it's a guy who maybe said, hey, look, this is sore, but wasn't bad enough to make him stop practicing, right?
Yep. So every day there's going to be things that come up, questions, injuries, minor to major, and it requires an evaluation, an assessment, and that's usually even review of injury video, assessing directly hands-on the player, and then determining who might need more advanced imaging tests and other things to define their injury, because we're trying to determine, is it safe for them to continue? Is it an injury that needs to be protected or even fixed? And with 90 players and a lot going on in terms of contact, various drills, a lot can happen. And it really does. In the first week of training camp tends to be, at least of contact part, a very high rate of injury. And if we make it through that, then it settles down a little bit. So it takes a lot of effort and vigilance and time to do that. And then what happens is when they have injuries that need to be addressed and they can't participate, the next step is we need to bring in other people. So right. It's an ongoing process, and so that begets the next step.
Right. So that's where I was going next. And so, the free agents come in both because we need to fill spots when guys are injured and can't perform, but also coaching staff, front office, they're constantly looking for different talent or needs, or guys become available because other teams don't have that need. And what is a free agent physical kind of like? What are you doing during that process?
Well, so what happens is, as you said, there's a lot going on the business side, and then there's the coaching side, and you need players to practice, you need players to develop. And so as you're molding and developing a team, you need to constantly be thinking ahead, what happens if the guy you're counting on isn't available? What do I have lined up? Who can I bring in? How quickly can we get up to speed? So they're constantly searching, talking, listening, bringing people in to see if they're healthy, if they're available. Some players will be released as team needs around the league change. And that need, if they're no longer needed on one team, then we may have that need for that player. And so immediately they get flown in. And sometimes at the drop of a dime, we have someone show up and they need a physical.
Yep. And so what are you doing during that physical? Kind of specifically, obviously you're doing a thorough orthopedic history and exam, but what are you really looking for in terms of, is it past injuries, or are there things that are concerned for management going forward? Where do you get some of that information?
Well, most people have had previous injuries. You're looking at the severity and the impact it has on their ability to perform and the potential for re-injury. What's their durability? If they had an injury, are they adequately healed relatively safe to play? Are they going to get hurt again? Do they have a medical condition which would render it unsafe for them to participate? And that's where our medical colleagues are so important. Real issues from the heart and lung, even young people, arrhythmias, congenital things that you may not think about, developmental, that you need to really be aware of and vigilant so that people remain healthy and safe, and there's no catastrophic events. So you have to research what they've had done, and is that compatible with high-level elite play safely?
Right. And so we're also, from an orthopedic standpoint, assessing, with some of these previous injuries, body parts on imaging and exam, is there a short-term risk that this person may get injured or might not be, their body part may break down early, or is there a longer term risk to the organization? And that's kind of how we approach some of these older injuries and the information that we receive.
We're trying to see what their athletic lifespan might be. And sometimes it's more limited, but they do have ability to participate in the short term, but may not be durable, may not last over time. Certain injuries we can correct or improve, and certain ones we can only manage. And we have to assess, what do we think that knee, for example, that is becoming more and more worn out, what can it tolerate safely? What kind of performance can you get out of it? And can we do it based on their size, their position, their weight, what's being asked of them, their reps, and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into kind of formulating a risk assessment.
So yeah, and that, of course, we do in conjunction with our athletic training staff, which I forgot to mention, is all part of this process for us and is amazing in Florham Park. The other component to this is not every player's injury or history of injury will react the same way. So sometimes it's hard for us to predict. We've obviously seen it, and we'll get to combine stuff where we have players where we look at and say, wow, is this guy going to last a year? And they have a 5 or 7 year career, on an arthritic knee and things like that. So that part gets a little bit tricky sometimes to predict how they're going to really perform.
Or medicine, I should say, as you know, is not an exact science. So it can be a head scratcher sometimes. And sometimes, how they've performed, how they cope, their personality, their past history kind of may predict or help predict what they're capable of dealing with, playing through, or how they react to it. So you got to take a deeper dive and know the individual, know the player, and experience is very, very helpful. Seeing and living through years of seeing what people can do potentially and what is safe is very valuable.
Absolutely. And that also trickles down. You cover college and you cover high school, myself, high school football. So that knowledge also trickles down as you take care of those patients as well.
Oh, it's invaluable. Part of what I enjoy about sports medicine is that it's kind of like recess from school. You get out of the office, you get to go into different environments, you have interaction with all different sorts of people that you may not be able to interact with in other specialties, such as athletic trainers, coaches, and you can learn a lot. You learn about organization and management outside the office of health issues, communication with the different health specialists within each school or university, and you create a sort of organizational flow and information flow and organization, which you learn at the higher level to NFL, and it really does apply and trickles down to your university and high schools, with communication being the biggest thing, both to the staff and parents, and being able to then utilize your knowledge that you've gained over the years from these elite players and being able to advise younger players on what can be done, what should be done, what is safe, what shouldn't be done.
Right. And I think obviously it's great diagnostically and helpful for us to have that experience, but also these NFL guys are getting paid a lot of money to do what they're doing. Our high school guys, well, maybe NIL will go to the high school level soon. But we'll see. So, there's obviously, we're building this up to some preseason games, and then eventually we get to the end of the season. We're going to talk about what a game day is like in our next episode. And then preseason kind of ends when they cut the roster down, sort of end of August, early September. And so is there anything else you would add about that preseason experience before we move on?
Yeah, it's very busy. And when a lot of people, it's a large number to manage and a large number of injuries. It takes some time, and availability is key. And it takes help. Like having you to help, to assist, Dr. Montgomery is invaluable. Dr. Hirschman, you just can't do it alone, and you have to collaborate, share, review together. You get to reach out and talk to other specialists and team physicians around the league, which is one of the benefits as well during this process where there's a little more concentration of injury, to share and talk about how to manage some unique things in different circumstances and how to do the most for these players who is their livelihood, how to keep them going. And so it's very enjoyable having the opportunity to interact around the country and to know other physicians, team physicians, and have them share their experience. It's an exponential learning experience, which is, again, fantastic. But the month of training camp is tough. The games do require the same amount of coverage. The preseason games, practices can be a little different. And you can have joint practices with other teams, which gets a little chippy.
Little feisty.
A little chippy, and it tends to be a little crazy, but it's fun. Again, you get to interact with different colleagues in different institutions, and you get to see and interact with other players. So that's a unique thing that recently, in recent years, has been done, is these joint practices, mostly to decrease the load and reps on teams, because there's a lot of practice and a lot of load and reps high level that can wear on and lead to injury.
Right. And so, I think that's a great summary of how intense it can be, both for the players who are trying to actually make the team, as well as for the staff that's trying to keep them all healthy and get them back on the field as quickly as possible. So that's it for this first episode of the OrthoZone, talking about the NFL team physician management. Listen to our next episode that's going to discuss what it's like during the season. And specifically, we're going to take you through 1 week in the life of the head orthopedic surgeon. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Don't forget to share the podcast with others who might find it helpful, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Tri-County Orthopedics to stay connected. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.